Yet another stab in the back. Trump has extended the sanctions that will destroy Russia's economy. The contract soldiers have run out. Putin announces mobilization. Trump gives Iran 10 days, or else there will be an invasion. Russians will be tried through messengers. The curtain has closed, and Ukraine is preparing a 3-year war plan. We'll talk about all this right now. Friends, please welcome Rostislav Murzagulov, a political technologist, to the Razborka project. Rostislav, hello, glad to see you.
Likewise.
Listen, so let's talk. What should we discuss? So many times this year, Donald Trump has really made us question what's going on with the sanity of this world. And yet I read the news that Trump has officially extended it for another year. Sanctions against Russia because of the Russian-Ukrainian war. This, in fact, comes from reports in the Federal Register. So, what do you think about this? After all, despite the statements, despite attempts to push Ukraine into some unclear negotiation format, which Ukraine is participating in, even if without results, the US is still putting pressure on Russia. Does this pressure continue, and does it really help Ukraine more than it harms?
In reality, of course, I always say that regardless of what Comrade Trump personally wants, and regardless of the fact that he likes making money, and then, as the saying goes, a little bird told me, this is what they call Trump's envoys in the Kremlin. They call them Vitek and Zitek over there. That is, they basically consider them as their own people. So we all understand who we're talking about here. And I think the viewers already get it too. That is Stephen Witkoff and accordingly Jared Kushner, about whom we once joked that it's interesting when he negotiates. He has it written there, that he sleeps with the president's daughter. On the nameplate, or however it was written, it says, "Take Trump." How does that even look? It's such an interesting setup. It's clear, right, that personal interests are valued above all, and that's why it's the business partner and in fact a family member who goes. So it's a rather strange kind of diplomacy. But nevertheless, even though these personal interests are clear and obvious to this family, Adams, so yes, but at the same time, they still can't completely disregard state interests either. And the United States as a country has a very clear interest. There is a very clear understanding that Russia today is, well, an enemy to them. Maybe it's not number one, but it's definitely among the top 1, 2, or 3. Because it's clear that Putin's attempt to reshape the world according to his own ideas of what is ideal is extremely dangerous for America. And the fact that today Trump is still trying to do business with anyone he can, including, by the way, even Iran. If that question comes up, I'll explain later why I mean it that way. But at the same time, the national interests and the interests of this so-called democratic bloc, whose leader has always been America, he can't just completely throw them into the dustbin of history, no matter how much he might want to.
What do you think Zelensky once again writes? He stated this in the Wall Street Journal and in private conversations with his advisors, saying that the negotiations had failed. Well, this was to be expected. And when Medinsky once again decided to give a lecture on history. Many people say, by the way, that there is something very positive, the exchange of prisoners and the bodies of the deceased. This is definitely a plus, but it has never really been a criterion that the process has actually started moving. Because the exchange of both prisoners and bodies has been happening since 2022. Almost without interruption? Tell me, please, they're writing that a plan for conducting the war over the next 3 years needs to be developed. Again, they say that Zelensky reported exactly that. There have been no official statements. Do you believe that Ukraine really should be developing a 3-year plan right now? What should this plan look like from a political standpoint? Let me put it this way, in terms of support. Who should be the main focus? And without whom would it be impossible to fight for 3 years?
Ukraine needs to develop a plan, not for 3 years of confrontation with Russia, but for at least 3 decades, because as long as this state exists in its current form, right next to Ukraine, right next to Europe, there will always be danger. It will always be a threat, if not a direct military invasion, then these hybrid military incursions. And if not hybrid or even military invasion, then at the very least, crude and maximally barbaric political pressure, which is exactly what we are experiencing now. I've already told you and the viewers that I traveled through all the countries surrounding Ukraine, and everywhere today there are these attempts at such pressure from Putin. Therefore, of course, Putin will not leave Ukraine alone. If Putin, God willing, goes to meet his ancestors, then accordingly and most likely for quite some time to come. There will probably be some sort of succession process taking place right there. It will still be a threat. And until a normal, adequate democratic regime is established in Russia, or the country is defragmented into several parts, where in some there will be a kind of democratic regime, in others probably some sort of Chinese province, which I most likely foresee in the Far East, and in others perhaps a kind of Caucasian Muslim state, which is also quite easy to imagine. You don't even need to be a particular expert to see it. Thus, we conclude that, unfortunately, Ukrainians and Ukraine cannot afford to relax yet, despite all the fatigue from the war. And the fact is that in the near future, the military component must also be strengthened. This needs to be done regardless of whether we believe or not that Russia will sharply decrease the intensity of hostilities. Because today the military component is in principle such an important element of political pressure, and much more important than, for example, 10 to 15 years ago, because it has always been believed that if you have a lot of weapons, people are more likely to agree with you. But this weapon was used extremely rarely, even just a couple of decades ago, and only by a very small number of countries. And generally speaking, they at least tried to formally coordinate these actions with each other. Today, Putin has broken all the rules, destroyed everything, and so all the weapons that are in storage or at the country's borders have now become essentially a factor of direct pressure from the state that possesses them. Therefore, Ukraine needs to arm itself to the teeth and accordingly prepare on top of that for political confrontation with Russia until the inadequate government in Russia is replaced by an adequate one.
Putin's plan to freeze Ukraine has failed. The harshest winter, fortunately, is coming to an end. And everyone notes that at the front. By the way, this was not only due to the loss of Starlink by the Russian army, but also simply because of the stupidity of the Russian command. Ukrainian defenders even managed to recapture and regain control over some positions in the Zaporizhzhia direction, so to speak. No one is even talking about any advances. At times, the Russian army is even facing some operational breakthroughs by the Ukrainian defense forces. I want to ask you about the following. The Institute for the Study of War writes that Putin is now preparing all the conditions for announcing a new partial mobilization, or at least for carrying it out, possibly without an official statement through the media. Well, first of all, there's Telegram, of course, and what's happening with it right now. All the Z propagandists are howling that no one will be able to report anything about the progress of this mobilization. What do you think about this? Will Putin take this step? What is his plan for finding people to send to the front?
For Putin, the situation is actually not as simple as many people think. And I always say when someone, whether my friends from Ukraine or reasonable people of other nationalities, say that Putin can wage war endlessly, Putin cannot wage war endlessly. Today, Putin's situation at the front is dire. It's catastrophic. His professional army has been decimated there and all his equipment has been destroyed. Virtually all the ground equipment he had at his disposal is gone. And today, Putin is facing an extremely difficult situation with his personnel. The way they constantly push the narrative through their propaganda that, oh, Ukraine is having a hard time with personnel is actually just a reflection of their own problem. Because now they are recruiting these thugs into their army with great difficulty. Because everyone in Russia already knows what these meat grinder assaults are about. What kind of tactic is it that shows absolutely no regard for its own personnel? And that's why today they have a gigantic problem with recruitment. And if Putin does end up making this foolish move, if he tries to violate again, this tacit agreement with his own population that he won't touch the so-called decent people, in quotes, of course, those who sit quietly and keep their heads down, and that he recruits for the war only those who are ready to be killers and to be killed for 200,000 rubles. And so, accordingly, this arrangement seems to suit everyone. If he breaks this agreement again and starts rounding up those people who don't want to become killers or be killed for $2,000, just a little over that, then accordingly, it will cost him dearly. It might even cost him his political career, and very quickly at that. Because that's the red line that will turn those plush teddy bears, which make up 95% of Russian society, into something much more dangerous. And that's why, in general, we will see mass resistance, although it may be rather sluggish. Outwardly, it may seem weak, but whenever there is a large protest movement, even a sluggish one, there are always some fuses that can be lit. You can connect it to something and organize some serious protests. That's why, unfortunately, too many people in Putin's inner circle, it's understandable, because unfortunately, there are still some smart people left who serve him, who serve Putin. And that's a disadvantage for us, because if there were only those military types left, they would have tried to carry out mobilization long ago. They actually did push it through at some point. And they told Putin that, yes, there's nothing to worry about. The people are obedient and so on. Yes, but people are obedient only up to a certain point. And that's why my bet is still that Putin will not carry out a mobilization. As far as I know from the corridors and those little conversations that reach me in part, if they try to increase the number of people at the front now, it will once again be through violence, once again through prison, once again through those investigative bodies where every investigator in Russia has been given a task. Each investigator is required to send 2 people per month to the war. This is actually a very large resource. There are tens of thousands of these investigators across the country. If he meets this godforsaken quota, then he receives a bonus of 50,000 rubles for each person sent. If he doesn't meet the quota, he loses even his regular ongoing bonus. This is what I know directly from inside the system, straight from a person who works there and for some reason shared this information with me. And accordingly, I assume that these methods and similar ones will be used even more actively because, for example, another person from inside also told me that someone has a wife. She is subject to military service, works in a hospital, and they tell the person, here's your contract, dear, go ahead and sign it. Otherwise, we'll send your wife to the war right now. So these are the kinds of methods that will be used. Besides, they also have an old plan there. They have a lot of freeloaders there, all these people walking around in uniforms. Roughly speaking, they have about 2 million people there who theoretically, thank you, who possess weapons and have uniforms, military ranks. It's a huge army, all these cops, National Guard members, and other uniformed personnel. And theoretically, there is also talk that just like during the Chechen campaign, they will try to form some combat-ready units out of them and send them there on assignments. But they haven't resorted to this method because all these armies and cops only know how to take bribes and walk the streets. And they don't know how to fight at all. Their physical condition is poor and their morale is even worse. So these are the options they have. And honestly, all the scenarios are bad for them too. The only thing they really should do is drastically reduce the intensity of the war. And then many of their problems would be solved. Many would be over, especially since that businessman from Washington is also offering to lift their sanctions, to remove them, do business, and make trillions of dollars together. But there's the schizophrenia of the leader who doesn't understand this.
This confirms your words that mobilization is being prepared, but it's not certain that Putin will actually carry it out. I also forgot to mention something, an important factor. The laws adopted at the end of last year are evidence of this, allowing the Ministry of Defense to use a 2 million strong mobilization reserve, as well as the fact that the influx of contract soldiers has stopped covering losses at the front. But we've discussed this already. In other words, more are dying than are joining. Let's discuss the situation inside. Russia, I don't know how much hope there is for an internal crisis, the discontent of the elites. It seems to me that this is also an important factor that should not be overlooked from time to time. The Kremlin demanded that state-run media outlets convince Russians of the usefulness of united Russia ahead of the State Duma elections. So, a jellyfish? This is reported. So it is clear that there is now an active bombardment of press releases. Dark notes are being sent out, super. Custom-made materials are actively being produced about the benefits of united Russia. Tell me, please, do they have any problems with voting for united Russia? And are there any chances, any problems, any prospects of a crisis specifically in the State Duma? Or is this all, just standard moves that aren't worth paying attention to?
You do need to pay attention to this. In Russia, the election procedure is completely non-existent. Well, that is, if we're talking not de jure, but de facto, their voting has long been conducted according to the following scheme. I'm telling you right now what I know from the inside, straight from first-hand sources, directly from... You can't get any more firsthand than this. Unfortunately, I myself have attended meetings with Tashkirenko where all of this was happening. It was like this 10 years ago and 5 years ago as well. Well, after that, I wasn't there anymore. But nevertheless, nothing has changed since then. Here's how it happens. Tashkirenko gathers the vice governors in charge of internal policy. Well, I used to be one of them too, though that was already 15 years ago. But nevertheless, this scheme hasn't changed either. He gathers these deputies, meaning the Russian governors responsible for internal policy, and each of them is given a number. A number for United Russia, a number for the Communist Party, a number for the SR Party, and sometimes they add or remove some other party as well. And so they adjust the results to match these numbers. After that, the governor in turn denies it. He holds a meeting with the heads of cities and districts in his jurisdiction. Sometimes the governor himself is present, sometimes he isn't. It depends on how the authorities are set up in a particular region. So this person gathers these deputies or city heads, and each of them is also given a number. The numbers are different, because if everything were exactly the same across the whole country and all the regions, it would be too obvious. Accordingly, different numbers are given, and these numbers are then adjusted to fit the desired result. After that, everything goes to the Territorial Precinct Election Commission, where the protocols are filled out accordingly. And the actual number of ballots in the ballot boxes is also adjusted. Now, practically no one is watching this process. There is almost no oversight. And that's why, in fact, such an absolutely fake procedure is carried out, a complete simulacrum in the Baudrillard sense. And accordingly, to speculate that someone is afraid for united Russia and that someone won't vote is unfortunately absolutely out of the question.
Listen, what do you think about this news? I think it deserves attention. The head of the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation has proposed integrating Max into judicial proceedings to make it easier to try Russians. What is this about? So he proposed this state messenger Max, which is now actively trying to replace Telegram, or rather to substitute it for Telegram. So he also proposed integrating the Gosuslugi portal into judicial proceedings. According to his statement, this step will help eliminate abuses related to Russians deliberately skipping court hearings. What do you think about this news? What could this mean, including what?
It means that they are still striving to completely lock everything down, this boiling cauldron of public life. All of this is being done exactly according to the patterns that were discussed when analyzing the very first Russian revolution, the revolution of 1917. And this cauldron, as Bonch-Brujevich and other revolution analysts wrote back then, this cauldron, the Tsarist authorities, so to speak, sealed it up in a petty, insignificant way. This is happening exactly the same way now. And accordingly, Russians who used to be able to vent a little, either at someone or at each other in Telegram channels, now they are being completely deprived of this opportunity. They really are steamrolling through with their messenger, which is, basically a direct window to the security services. And when you shout something into it, it's clear that the security officer hears everything. And this way, they think it's easier for them to control the situation. They are deeply mistaken, just as the Russian Tsarist authorities once were. And it's clear that this provokes a backlash even among the so-called Z community. I read all sorts of scoundrels like Podolyaka, so-called military bloggers, and they even discuss there that this sealing off of the cauldron will lead to the opposite result. Well, frankly speaking, let Putin have at it, give him a drum around his neck. We're rooting for his team, sincerely so.
100%. There's something else I want to ask you. I made a note of what seems to me a noteworthy piece of news. The sessions of this Peace Council, which is headed by Donald Trump, have started. So far, nothing is really happening there, except that at one of the sessions, Donald Trump is sleeping. There's a video where the American president is literally falling asleep. What do you think? Is this institution even capable of producing something new, of surprising anyone in any way? Because it really seems like it's just functioning right now simply because Donald Trump is still interested. But in a month or two, he might just shut it down, saying it's too expensive, ineffective, and just plain stupid. And that, in fact, it was forced on me by other Americans.
You know, Sasha, as I listen to you now, I catch myself thinking that I've somehow gone back to my Soviet youth, because back then there were the same kinds of conversations about gerontocracy, about all sorts of strange things, about these very old people who run everything. There were jokes back then, for example, like the party never sleeps, comrades, the party is asleep. Well, actually, the whole world is now suffering from the same kind of gerontocracy. And then there was another old Soviet joke that the Soviet people want peace, preferably all of it. Then Trump also wants peace, preferably all of it. So accordingly, he called it a board. Board is generally a business term. It wasn't really used much in diplomacy before, because in diplomacy, they usually use the English word council. And accordingly, that word comes from the world of politics, from the world of diplomacy. But Trump directly introduced the term, essentially a board of directors for planet Earth. And naturally, he put himself in charge of it. Because after finishing his presidency, he doesn't plan to leave politics. He plans to move up to a higher position. So, chairman of the board of directors of planet Earth. Naturally, this will end in a loud flop, because respectable countries didn't go there as participants. They politely sent representatives so as not to anger the big boss. As Mark Rutte would say, right now everyone is talking about Trump. Accordingly, and yet there are actual participants there. It's an amazing thing. It's some kind of, some sort of American Belarusian thing, isn't it? And accordingly, my colleagues who are discussing all this from the inside are already joking about it too, saying, where did the Trump-Lukashenko Peace Council disappear to? Either they're out playing golf or digging potatoes. That's the running joke. So no, of course, I don't think this structure can be alive or effective, because who would agree with the decisions made by these Trump yes men from such wonderful countries? I'm not being sarcastic here. The countries themselves are wonderful, but they've just been unlucky with their leaders. So who does he have there besides Belarus, Uzbekistan, and a lot of other such countries where, as Trump says, there are strong leaders? Yes, that's how he delicately refers to dictators. Well, basically, they'll just play around with this, but it won't have any serious impact on the course of world history. So just remember this scene, so to speak.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Listen, why does he want to publish connections? Connections with UFOs, classified files, which the government supposedly hasn't published? What is this?
Anyway, this is done so that these files will replace other files. It's all very simple and clear here, because he has a huge problem. I have a lot of friends in America, contacts, from politics, and not only that, just, so to speak, just people who simply live and work somewhere in the American heartland. And now, basically, everyone is indignantly discussing what's going on with all these files. So photos have surfaced showing Trump hugging his wife, who, as it turns out, also came almost from the same agencies that worked with Mr. Epstein. Furthermore, Jeffrey Epstein's primary personal assistant, the very woman who was specifically tasked with the responsibility of hand-selecting potential candidates for him, can be seen standing there quite comfortably and acting very freely as she warmly hugs Melania Trump. This specific visual evidence naturally leads any observer to some rather obvious and troubling conclusions, suggesting quite strongly that they were both deeply and inextricably involved within the inner workings of Epstein's extensive social and criminal network during that period of time. And that's why this is a serious blow for Trump. For people like you and me, who see the situation in Ukraine every single day, we're really not thinking about any pimping agencies, escorts, or anything like that, right? Honestly, we have other, much more important problems here. But over there, in America, this had the effect of a bomb going off. Because Trump, if you remember, hid all this for a long time. He didn't want to publish these files for a long time because it's obvious to everyone what's in those files. A lot of files haven't been published, and everyone understands that something is obviously being hidden there. And that's why Trump's ratings predictably started to fall. Now more and more people are predicting this for him. A resounding failure not only in the midterm elections, but in all subsequent ones as well. And accordingly, for Trump, right now, you and I are talking about problems that, frankly, are at the very bottom of Trump's list of concerns. What Trump cares about first and foremost is maintaining his power, making sure his allies keep their majority everywhere. And all of this puts that at risk. That's why Trump comes up with all these stories. For example, now he'll publish everything related to aliens. Then most likely he'll escalate the situation in Iran somehow just to distract people with that topic. And in this way, really, nothing has changed on planet Earth since the time when that very phrase about a small victorious war, it doesn't matter whether it's with Iran or with alien civilizations.
Let's talk about Iran to wrap up, since you mentioned it and we touched on it at the beginning of our conversation. Let's still explain to our viewers why we're bringing up this issue. Trump gave Iran 10 to 15 days to make a deal on the nuclear issue. He called it a substantive agreement on the nuclear question. In response, Iran stated that if threatened, American bases in the region would become legitimate targets. What do you think about this new round of escalation? Trump versus the Ayatollahs? How could this end? Well, so far we remember that Trump simply abandoned the Iranian protesters. That's one of the latest developments. And now what is he capable of?
I have a personal interest in this whole story because I'm friends with several Iranians I studied with at the University of Paris at business school 10 years ago. And they're wonderful guys. I've talked about them before. They have exactly the same minds as you and I do, right? They want their country to be free and without any kind of ugliness. And so, of course, I really hope that this absolutely disgusting, misanthropic regime will be overthrown, even if it takes outside help. This person, who is by no means a saint either, is simply dealing with some personal issues related to the publication of photos that confirm that he was, in fact, involved with Mr. Epstein. That is my hope. Unfortunately, there is another possibility. Just today, literally an hour before our conversation, Comrade Abbas Araghchi, he's the Iranian deputy foreign minister, quite a prominent figure there and someone who never says anything without reason. He's quite on a short leash with Comrade Ayatollah, the supreme leader. He said that they have found a path to peace. This suggests that most likely this shuttle diplomacy that some of Iran's neighbors have been engaged in there who are also engaged in large-scale oil trade, and most likely they finally managed to get through to these elderly mullahs with their proposals saying, guys, either you all get bombed to hell right now, or you hand over control of the oil to us together with the Americans, and then you can live long and happily doing whatever you want in your Iran. And most likely they will still go with this second scenario. If they don't, it will simply be an emotional decision, which might still be pushed through by that 87-year-old Comrade Rahbar. If he does that, it will certainly mean death for him, most likely a physical one, and rather swift, because for the Americans, destroying Khamenei's residences is not particularly difficult. Well, here we have pretty much the same situation as with Putin. That is sort of, all logic tells him that he should submit to the Americans and not make any sudden moves, and accordingly reduce the intensity of the war and try, little by little, to get out from under the sanctions that are killing his country for sure. And they are turning his country with a guarantee into a pariah and a kind of economic and political half-corpse for the next 20 to 30 years. That's the minimum. But he doesn't do this, Putin, for exactly the same reason, because he's been in power for 1,000 years. He's an old and foolish man. And accordingly, if suddenly, for example, these same reasons, if Iran is allowed to start escalating with the Americans, and the Americans actually need an escalation there right now because they want to distract their population from the problems of their own government, yes, I mean the American leadership, then we'll end up with a small victorious war there, or we'll get a deal, and then unfortunately for the people of Iran, but fortunately for America and for Ukraine, by the way, Donald Frederikovich will gain total control over the global oil industry, and then, of course, he'll keep oil prices low. And if that happens, then that's for sure. It's basically a quarantine for the public regime, to put it simply.
And yes, considering how absolutely and entirely Venezuelan oil is now dominated and overseen by Donald Trump, well, in this matter, we can only offer him our very best wishes for success. Thank you. Rostislav Murzagulov, analyst, was on the air for Razborka. All the best.